Hey, welcome to my backyard. I wanted to record something quickly to try to explain a concept to you all that if I wrote it down, would probably take about as long as the article that was the advanced reading. So if you did it, you already know some of the stuff. If you or you may not understand it. If you didn't do it, hopefully this will help illuminate something. So what I want to talk about for a few minutes is this concept of the banality of evil. Okay, so banality basically just means boringness, right? Something that's banal is something that's boring, it's something that's not interesting. And this concept of the banality of evil is really trying to explain how do we get certain things that have happened in history where lots of people who are not horrible, maniacal, laughing monster villains get involved with some really horrible, monstrously villainous stuff, right? Um, and where the concept originally comes from is from looking at the Holocaust during World War II, the extermination of the Jews and a lot of Roma and homosexuals and people with mental disabilities, all sorts of people who were killed. Um, what makes this sort of a hard question about it is that so many people were involved. You can't kill millions of people without getting a huge section of your society involved with it. This is not a few people who happen to be very evil. This is lots and lots of people all working together to kill people. So, how does this happen? A lot of people have a lot of ideas about it. One of the most influential comes from the philosopher Hannah Arendt, R Arendt, if you want to go look her up. Um, who at the time was working as a journalist. So, what had happened very quickly was that Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the Nazi leadership, was found. He had run to South America after World War II. He was found by the Israelis and kidnapped and brought back to Israel to stand trial for his involvement in the Holocaust. Arendt was sent by her newspaper to cover the trial of Eichmann. And she ended up writing a series of articles that became this book called Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. And where she came up with the idea was that she faced something very surprising. When she went to cover this, she was expecting, Eichmann was not just some random soldier. Eichmann was a leader. He was one of the people in charge of the genocide in World War II. And so she was expecting to find a kind of mini Hitler, right? Someone who would seem clearly monstrous. And that's not what she encountered. Eichmann was kind of a nobody, frankly. He got involved with the Nazis because his life kind of wasn't going that well, and the Nazis. This is not a joke. He talked about how he got involved with the Nazis because the Nazis had cool uniforms, and they got to do this cool thing where they would the SS guards would ride on the outside of like the politicians' cars as guards, right? And he was like, "That looks rad. I want to be one of those guys." So he got involved basically because he was kind of a loser, and then he ended up rising in power within the Nazi Party, basically by being a good office worker, a good bureaucrat, right? Um, he was not the kind of person who woke up in the morning hating Jews and went to bed at night hating Jews and was filled with this fire of hatred. He was just this guy, and he just didn't care that much about the fact that when he filled out reports, um, you know, it led to millions of people getting murdered instead of leading to millions of hot dogs being made or millions of cars being manufactured. Right? He was just trying to get ahead, get promotions, get a nice life for himself. Yada yada yada. He was kind of a boring guy. So Arendt wrote this whole book based on the trial, and she coined this idea of the banality of evil, which is that most large scale evil is carried out by people who are boring, who are not in it for any great vengeful or hateful purpose, but are just kind of going along. Now, a lot of people have understood this as being about the way that any one of us, wrong place, wrong time, could end up doing these horrific things, right? Um, that's not quite what Arendt was talking about. Evil's not boring in the sense that everyone's evil and it's just like you just kind of lucked out that your job is teaching high school and not teaching people how to run gas chambers more efficiently. Um, what Arendt is talking about is more specific, where her argument is that there's a kind of bureaucratic culture in 20th century and arguably 21st century society that encourages people to be aggressively unreflective, to not think about what the consequences of their actions are, to not think about how they're related to other people, but to just think about how do I do my job, go home, and watch TV, right? Or, I mean, 1940s, probably 30s and 40s, not watching a lot of TV, but how do I do my job and go home and like have a nice life, even if it hurts other people? Because we just fundamentally don't care about that, right? And her argument is to some extent that modern society creates this kind of bureaucratic person, this kind of person who burns out their ability to care for other people in a way that is, in some ways, deeply inhuman, but also inhuman in a very everyday way, right? In a way that many of us could imagine ending up as, and many of us have probably encountered people who seem this way, right? The icon of evil for Arendt is not like the horror movie slasher serial killer. The icon of evil in this way is like the person at the bank who is going to close your account even though it means you don't get to pay your rent and you are out on the street. Pardon me. So, for something like Nazi officials like Eichmann, a lot of people have found this to be a really plausible analysis and one that helps understand how something like the Nazi Holocaust could have happened, at least with respect to the officials, the leaders. Something like the Rwandan genocide, though, poses a different kind of problem, right? We can say, sure, even for the Rwandan genocide, right? Maybe something like the authoritarian and bureaucratic nature of modern life, even in a place like Rwanda, in 1994, they still had, jobs and politics and radio stations, right? This is not ancient times or savage lands, right? This is a poor country, but in the modern world, right? So they have many of the same things that we have in the rest of the modern world. Um, So maybe you can use this concept for the guy who is sitting in the Radio Mikolin radio station, right, and talking about how Tutsi are bad, right? Because maybe he's just thinking the same way. It's like, well, hey, this is what sells, right? My advertisers like it when lots of people tune in, and people tune in for the hate radio, so I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to think too hard about. I'm going to aggressively not think too hard about how this affects people. But the people actually doing the killing pose a different kind of problem, right? Um, Burning out your ability to think reflectively about your role in the world might explain how you can sit in an office and sign something that gets someone killed. But it's a little bit of a harder jump to understand, well, how can you personally hit someone in the face with a machete, right, and kill them up close like that? That's to many of us seems like a very non-banal and very non-boring kind of evil, right? Um, so Tanner, in this very interesting article that was the advanced reading, tries to extend Arendt's basic concept to understanding things like the Rwandan genocide. And basically, his argument is that for us, right, for most people living in the United States in the early 21st century, for most people who are going to read an academic article, um, bureaucratic evil, the evil of the office, seems boring. It seems very close to the kinds of evil that we see in our own everyday lives. But killing someone physically seems very far. But most of the killers in Rwanda were not working office jobs. This was not their world, right? Their world was farming. And so he argues that there are, in fact, a few other kinds of ways to make killing boring that were at work there, right? One, and this comes out in some of the discussion in Machete season, is that the actual physical, literal act is similar to what they would do all day, right? A lot of these were people who were accustomed to slaughtering animals, right? I have never personally killed an animal for food, um, but like my wife grew up and her grandfather and uncles would occasionally kill a pig. A pig is a big animal and it will fight you, right? Her descriptions of it, this is not easy, right? This is hard work to kill a living thing of that size. So if you are someone, the argument goes, who is accustomed to, in your everyday life, um, killing goats, killing cows, right? The jump to killing people is going to seem smaller than it does to many of us because you are already the kind of person who is not horrified by blood, right? Who's not horrified by having to take the life of something that's struggling against you. Humans are different, don't get me wrong, right? That's not what Tanner is saying, but he's saying that it makes the jump smaller if you target people for whom this is a more common experience in their lives, something like this killing. And then, the way you get them over that hump is all the other stuff they talk about in Machete season, right? When the Interahamwe come up, roll up on your house and basically are like, look, you join us in killing those Tutsi, we're going to kill you, right? Well, that thread is what gets you going, but the similarity of the killing to things you're familiar with are what makes it a thinkable act for you instead of an unthinkable act. And then, of course, you get other kinds of things that feed into that as well. Those radio stations that are reinforcing the idea that Tutsi are not human, right, are going to further help with getting you used to the idea that they are the kind of thing that can be killed just like animals can be killed, right, if it is useful to kill the animal. So to sum this all up, just going to think these are some important concepts and important for trying to get a little bit of grip on the horror of these things is to understand that for a lot of large-scale atrocities, like genocides, part of how they work is by getting relatively ordinary people to participate. And one aspect of that is by turning something that might initially seem horrific and unthinkable into something that is maybe unpleasant, but pretty mundane. And once you get things into that realm of thinkability, you've created a very dangerous situation. And understanding how that works can help us both understand individual instances of genocide, can help us understand what kinds of dynamics become dangerous for potentially sparking genocide, and can help us see these kinds of things as horrific, but essentially historical and not impossible to understand in terms of the overall dynamics of society and the overall dynamics of history.